to go through a couple of questions. So, when we are talking about cybersecurity, there are different types of controls that we have to implement cybersecurity. And it's easy to, it's obvious when you think about it. Sometimes the obvious just needs to be put into words. So the different types of controls that we have physical, technical, and administrative. Don't worry about these for now. We're going to come over to those. Physical, technical, and administrative is what I want for some. Sorry, I don't want to show you guys all of those just yet. Okay, physical, technical, and administrative. So physical controls, even though we're talking about cybersecurity, are actually very important due to what we're talking about. So there's the physical controls of security where we talk about things like fences, cameras, locks, badges. Those are all physical security controls that we have. There's also things like HVAC. When I first saw HVAC on the CISSP, what am I going to learn about here? And fire suppression systems. Those are all a part of physical security because we're talking now about the infrastructure that's required. We're certified information systems security professional. We need to secure the systems, including the physical aspects, not just access control. But if something happens when we're getting into disaster recovery, do we have fire suppression that can take care of our server room? Is there enough flow? Do we have cold lanes? Things like that. There are a lot of different physical controls, and they're not heavy on the aspects. Mostly, what we'll talk about today will get you 90% of the way there, probably. And a lot of things that are common sense in your workplace, if you just spend some time thinking about them a little bit more and putting words to the things that you already know, can be very helpful. So, technical controls. We're all very familiar with these. If we block a port on a firewall, that's a technical control. If you have, let's say, a badge, the badge is physical, and maybe if it's a badge where it's just visibility, if we're talking about a door scanner, that's physical. But that authentication process, the authorization process, that's a technical piece going on behind the scenes. Additionally, we have administrative controls. This is the unsexy side of cybersecurity that is growing more and more important. This is GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. GRC is a term you'll hear quite a bit to refer to anything administrative, governance, risk, and compliance. So you have administrative policies and procedures that help support the rest of this. So administrative policies and procedures. As a cybersecurity professional, things like an acceptable use policy are part of your responsibility and understand and know. So we have 3 different lanes for cybersecurity controls. Not all are equal, so we're going to talk about a couple of them, and I want you to try and identify whether they're physical, technical, or administrative, and then we're going to keep spoiling the answers for you guys. No cheating. And then we'll talk about some of these and what they mean in relation to it. So I'm just going to start through, and I'm going to ask the question. I'm not going to answer. You can see there's 27 of these or however many, so it's going to get a little awkward if you don't just shoot back with an answer. I don't care if you're right. If you're 60% sure you got an answer, shoot it out. I would rather you get it wrong here in the study groups than get it wrong in the test. So, all right, investigations. What this likely is referring to, it could be referring to like security investigations, audits, things like that. I see job rotation right above it, so it could be investigations even related to like background checks and things. So we can identify this as an administrative control. Who can tell me what the detective piece is? We haven't talked about any of these 5 and how they're related to these. Who can tell me what a detective control is and why an investigation might be a detective control versus something else?
You know, detective and preventative have always tripped me up too, especially when it comes to like the investigation thing. I don't know, I think detective like Sherlock Holmes or something, right? Doing the investigation. So it's looking for the potential vulnerability that the control would mitigate would be my stab at it.
Excellent, excellent. So we have a vote for preventative. Awesome. Who can play devil's advocate and shoot another answer out? Who can tell me why it's not preventative, why it's something else? Because this is what it is on the CISSP. There's 2 answers that are going to look so close.
preventive is something that would stop the security issue from happening. Uh, uh, when compared to detective is basically like it identify. Investigation is basically you are still in the process of identifying a particular kind of an issue, right? So I would term investigation into more of a detective side rather than on the preventive side.
Yeah, yeah, great job. And now let me tie those two answers together because you're both correct. The detective for this, without knowing more about investigations, which is just one single word and can be very broad, it's hard to really get into this. But the difference in the two answers that you have, because you're right, Vincent, this is if you were going to do an investigation, let's use a background check on a new employee, an onboarding process, you're reducing risk. It's kind of like supply chain almost in a way, you're investigating your employees. So it does prevent issues. You don't hire people that have really negative backgrounds. So it is preventative. But Keshva touched on this point, you're detecting before you're preventing. We didn't actually prevent anything from happening. All we did was investigate. And we found some stuff that's interesting, but we haven't done anything to prevent anything at this point. So that's just kind of where that difference is. We detected, now we can prevent and say, nope, you didn't get the job because of this. Or yeah, you got the job, awesome, come on in.
So like the policy that would prevent him from getting the job would be the preventative control, perhaps.
Exactly, exactly. And real quick, I'm going to hide some of these answers from you. Okay, perfect. And I'm going to write these down so I don't forget. Technical, physical, administrative. Let's focus on these first, and then we can. Well, yeah, we can do them all. Let me just jot these down so we have them in front of us, because I'm going to hide everything else. Okay, let's do job rotations. Oh no, that's a mistake. Okay, job rotations. First of all, who is willing to tell me why job rotation is even anything we're talking about in cybersecurity? Why would we rotate jobs?
To detect any fraud that is happening internally within the organization. Say, suppose there are two people who are doing the kind of job that is assigned to them. If two people partner up, then it is easy to create a fraud that could go unnoticed by the organization. So basically, the job rotation, what it does is either one of the member is allowed to go on a different shift or maybe a different kind of a like a mandatory vacation kind of a thing where another person comes on behalf of him and tries to see what has happened in the system. And if they detect any anomaly, they raise a flag and then let the organization know about it.
That's exactly right. Beautiful, beautiful explanation on that. And you use the term mandatory vacation too. You might see that on the CISSP potentially. Job rotation, mandatory vacation, very similar techniques to discover the same sort of thing that Keshva is discussing, which could be insider threats, potentially, could be malicious, of maybe there's two departments that are colluding. So we're talking separation of duties. You can actually see we have separation of duties coming up here, and that's a piece of what job rotation is. Let's say Vincent and I are working at the same company. I'm a systems admin, and I work and I have administrative privileges on the machine that I'm working on. But I don't have access to the production environment where the developers work, maybe, so that I can't get access to some of their sensitive code or make changes to a live production environment. Let's say I buddy up with someone, though, that is on that technical environment that does have access to it. And he and I work a back deal, kind of some shadow IT stuff, where he gets me some admin credentials to do what I would like. Well, that might not be anything malicious. It could be a malicious scenario where we're trying to introduce something negative, but it could just be totally innocent. So job rotations help you discover bad practices just as much as anything else. You step into, like, if you step into a new job and you're replacing someone who did a terrible job before you, you're like, oh, how did they do this? This is awful. I got to fix this. You discover even things like that. So there's a lot of reasons for job rotation. Not something you're going to see practiced super often, but you're going to get a test question about it. Keshva did an awesome job explaining. So anyone but Keshva, is that a technical, administrative, or physical control?
It would be an administrative control.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. This would be a policy. HR is saying, okay, you guys are going to swap jobs or change shifts or something. Okay, let's go up to something a little bit more challenging. Let's talk about a classification system. I'm gonna give you a little bit extra definition, and I don't know if it's gonna align perfectly with what whoever wrote this meant. But when I'm gonna talk about classification, let's talk about data classification. So, and let's actually go look up data classification levels and get a list. And let's actually do CISSP. Let's pull up our classification levels. Yeah, here we go.
Right.
So, sensitive, confidential, private, proprietary, and public. So these are what you'll see a lot of. There's also the government classifications. Does anyone work in government? I know I'm asking for hand raised, I can't see it. Yeah. But does anyone work in government sector? I've done. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Salvador.
I work for the government.
Oh, nice. Okay. So you're probably familiar with some of these other things then. I worked with the intelligence community for a little while doing some of this stuff. So we actually had to build out environments that could process top secret information and connect to a totally different network, have to harden things and secure things a little bit of a different way. But Salvador might be the only person that comes up against this. Data classification. First of all, why do we classify data? Who wants to jump in with their answer on that?
To protect it.
Yeah, to protect it. What am I looking at? Is this important? I don't know. Maybe it just fell off the printer. I have no idea. And if you work with a company that does have proprietary or sensitive data, then you do. So this, I'm going to tie this back to NIST. I love NIST. I want the.
Yeah, this just was released to 2.0.
Yeah, I just want the list of identifiers. So it starts with identify. Let me see if I can find something that has a visual.
I can find it for you. I do know what you're looking for,
Let me
actually.
just go to images.
There you go.
Okay, this will work. This is fine. So identify. This is the first step of the NIST cybersecurity framework, the CSF. If you're not familiar with this framework, it's an excellent foundation for anything cybersecurity. I highly recommend spending some time studying it. And the identify function is one of the most, I would say, misunderstood and underutilized functions. And it makes all other aspects of cybersecurity much easier. So with that in mind, let's go back and talk about classifying data. So what types of data are we responsible for? This is something that you have to identify, and compliance comes into this piece of, okay, I don't know if this piece of data is sensitive. Like the 3-digit like PIN number or whatever they call that on the back of your credit card. That's, if I have access to that of yours and if I'm not approved, that's illegal for me to have. It would be a data breach if I had something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have anything that had that sort of information, I need to make sure it's marked appropriately. And when you start having data classification levels, which are administrative, here, that should be, right? Classification system, administrative. You're deciding as a team, as managers, what is our level of responsibility for this data? How should it be classified? Then we can move into technical things of classification. Who can give me an idea of what a technical security control would look like when we're talking about data classification? There's no wrong answer. Well, I mean, there might be a wrong answer, but what would be an example of a technical control to help support a data classification system?
I want to say encryption.
Encryption? Yeah, absolutely.
Access control lists.
Access control list. Ooh, beautiful. Yeah, that's great. Salvador, I think maybe said something.
Separate networks.
Separate networks? Absolutely. What information is allowed to go where? This is kind of like identity and access management almost, but with data. It's with data. where is this private information allowed to go? Like Hishpa said, role-based access control. Who is allowed to use it? Are they allowed to edit it or just view it? So these are the sort of things when we're talking about data classification, we have to be aware of how we're using it. And I know I get, let's see, sorry, let me think for a second. Oh, Stuart popped up. I have some other resources on this I can send you guys, but just since I got distracted talking about classification of data, forgive me, and let me get this re-distracted and talk about data governance roles. First of all, let me just pause. I've been going for a little while. Do you have any questions on what I've chatted about so far? And are we okay to kind of move into some of these data governance roles concepts?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Any questions from anyone on what? I don't want to jump too fast because you're studying. The test is a mile wide and an inch deep. So if you have questions, back me up and ask away. All right, I'm going to take that as a no, and we'll move on. So, how do we classify data levels? Well, who is responsible for data? And you'll hear areas of responsibility. You'll hear concepts, especially when we start talking about cloud, of a shared responsibility model as well. So we need to decide our lanes. What is the systems administrator responsible for regarding data versus the CISO? This again goes back to that, what I drew out earlier of the strategic versus operational versus tactical. Tactically, someone has a very different set of responsibilities regarding data versus the manager. Cheryl, I'm sure you have some stories or things you could chime in and tell us about. So let's talk about these data roles so we can understand where they lie in that hierarchy. So we have a data owner, we have a data steward, and a data custodian. Let me jot these down for us here. So we have a data owner, steward, custodian. All right, I don't care about the correct terminology, but someone help distinguish these. Just take a guess. What is an owner responsible for that a custodian or a steward isn't? And I also want to just throw in one more, just kind of caveat in here of make up a title for who would have this responsibility of a steward. Okay, who, if you were going to point to someone in the organization, like you should probably be a data steward, what would their job title likely be? I would like you to think about that for a second if you can, but then just jump in, kind of give me your ideas. Cheryl, you might have a lot of information on this. It's beyond my level too. So anyway.
Well, I know
Good.
the data owner would probably be the person that created the document or media.
It very
And
well could be.
custodian would be like, I guess, the IT or the administrator to
Mhm.
make sure it is at its proper level.
Yeah,
I don't know what a steward would be.
yeah, that's okay. Great answer, Cheryl. Yeah, Salvador, did you have something, a thought on this?
I think that was Salvador.
Oh, was that Salvador? Sorry, I missed the screen on there. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about these roles. So the owner, you're right, this could be the person that created the data. If we're talking about an enterprise, a big organization, that likely isn't the case. So a data owner is the person that's ultimately responsible and accountable for that information that they have. If you ask the data owner, how many data records are you responsible for? They should be able to go get that number for you. If you're working in an organization, that's a common question on insurance forms of how many data records are you responsible for. You have to have an understanding, again, identification from the NIST cybersecurity framework, to identify what the volume or scope is of data that you're responsible for. So the owner is ultimately accountable for that. Everything goes through them. The buck stops with them. So if there's a breach, it's on their back. They could go to prison for stuff like that if they don't do a good job. They make decisions about how data is managed. They make decisions about classification, about how data is used. They'll make decisions about a data life cycle when data comes into the system versus when it's retired. Like retention policy, similar. So they'll make decisions about how this sort of stuff happens. So they sit at the strategic level. This might be your CIO potentially. It could be a CFO, any of those. It usually is like a C-suite or an exec or a VP or something like that who's your data owner. So strategic. Yeah.
Our company went into a hospital a couple of years ago, and there's a lot of HIPAA involved in the whole process. But they were telling us essentially, we just want you to protect everything because there was a divestiture and the new ownership. So they were just like, protect all of it. We're like, it doesn't exactly work that way. Like, you need to tell us where the HIPAA is, where the PII is, where the confidential stuff is, and we'll protect that appropriately.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting topic, it really is. And there's a lot of real world implications surrounding this that I know I've seen on the technical and managerial side for sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Vincent. Thanks for sharing that. Yep. Okay, so steward we weren't sure about. We'll come back to that. Let's talk about the custodian. A custodian, someone who's taking care of things. And that's exactly right. You just mentioned this is usually your tech. So this is your tactical level, and it could be a sysadmin, it could be a database administrator, something like that. They're the person that's responsible for hands-on keyboard executing this without deviating from what this person has decided. So this person has made decisions that this person is executing. The steward sits right in the middle at the operation level. This usually some sort of a manager, maybe something along those lines. But what they're responsible for is this translation. And the CISSP is really good at bridging this, bridging the strategic with the tactical. So someone has made a decision about how we manage data. We practice data classification as a company. That's what we do. I've decided that as the CIO. Go do as I did. So what does your manager do? How do I do data classification? Okay, well, let's look at some controls for how we do that. What types of data do we have? They start answering these questions and coming up with a process. And oops, everything spelled right. So again, jump in if you have questions on here. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on stuff like this, but again, this is being mile wide, inch deep. So the owner, again, he's going to establish that policy. This is how I say we manage data. The steward is going to help come up with a process. This is how we actually operationally fulfill the strategic data management policy. The procedure is what the custodian is doing. How do I do this? How do I do what my boss is telling me to do? Is there a standard operating procedure? Is there someone that can teach me to do it? All of these are very important levels, and you're going to get questions on the CISSP exam related to all three. I would say more so these two, not specific to the data owner, excuse me, but this operational and strategic levels of thinking and the process and policy. The actual procedure of executing the technical task isn't super common. It might be like 5 or 10% of questions. So I want to pause there because we kind of went through a lot of the different data owner or data roles that a company would have and kind of what those might look like. So I want to pause for different questions or chime in with other thoughts.
So the board of directors would fall under the data owners, or would it be?
Yes, it very well could. More often what it would show up like is the board of directors is a form of accountability for this owner. And it might help the owner make decisions too. A lot of times board of directors will have people from other industries and they would be able to help that owner make decisions. Hey, this is what we've done at this organization that we're going to work with. So this is the decision we would recommend / tell you to do on that. So yeah, great call. Board of directors, kind of at that strategic level. The data owner could sit on the board potentially. Usually it's just one person with maybe a team around them to help, just to narrow down who is responsible for this and accountable. Okay. You can jump in with more questions, but I'm gonna go. Remember, this is actually where we got started from a long time ago. I get excited. All right. So let's scroll up here, and we're going to talk more about these preventative, detective, corrective, deterrent, and recovery. So I'm going to give just a quick little couple sentences about each one, and then I'm going to quiz you on a few of these others and challenge you on some of them. So we've talked about preventative and detective. I think physical controls are helpful just because they're easier to visualize as an analogy. So let's use the idea of a fence or a barrier. It's a physical control, sure. Is it preventative? What kind of a fence would be preventative? Maybe like something with concertina wire. I'm not about to go over that.
Barbed
It's
wire.
a deterrent and a preventive. Or sorry, Robert, did you jump in there?
No, Sal, is barbed wire will definitely prevent someone.
Yeah, absolutely. It prevents and it deters. So a deterrent is
Like the things they put up so a car can't drive through, right?
helping someone else to make the right decision to stay away. Is kind of the way I'll phrase it. So a fence can also be a deterrent. That looks really hard. I don't want to mess with concertina wire, so I'm not even going to bother. So it's both preventative and a deterrent at that point. Let's see some other ones that might be. Well, let's see. Corrective. Let's find one that's corrective. Interesting. Corrective one. Okay. Logs. Let's talk about logs. I'm not saying they're corrective. Talk to me about logs. Are logs preventative? So first of all, is everyone comfortable with the concept of what a log is and kind of why they're important to cybersecurity? Is anyone just kind of want a little bit of refresher on logs?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So logs. Systems are doing stuff. They're doing stuff on their own, sitting there on the computer, and they're doing stuff over the web. They're interacting and talking. There's a log or a record of that communication if you configure it properly. So if I go look at my Windows logs, I'll see an event history of everything that's happened. It's all these little minute things of the system talking back and forth to each other, making little tiny updates and tweaks, little changes. And when we collect all of those logs in cybersecurity, we start to aggregate them, get a sense of all those logs and how is everything going in our organization. And we can start to use this to make decisions. And that's I don't want to give too much away because logs are very interesting to think about when we're discussing whether is a log like collecting logs, does that prevent something bad from happening? Is it detective? Does it help us know if something bad happens? Could it possibly be corrective? If something bad happens, are logs going to help that situation resolve itself somehow? I don't know. I'm asking. Deterrence. I don't know that there's a deterrent piece to logs unless it's maybe someone just doesn't want to mess with the system that's actually being monitored. Recovery too. Okay. So someone tell me why logs are detective. Why is a log collecting logs a detective control?
Well, sometimes you'll be able to see why the computer shut down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's
And
a lot of times that's what a SIEM is. System events and information monitoring system. That's exactly right. Tell us what's going on.
yeah, it could be an update or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It can also be detective. I mean, we can set up alerts, indicators of compromise. If anything changes here, I want to know, so send me an alert. So, and logs can definitely be detective. They can be corrective in a way, but more used for troubleshooting too is another common thing. We haven't really talked about change management, but change management requires a lot of these corrective types of controls when we're discussing that. So if something goes wrong, we want a control that mitigates our risk of having this project go off track. What is a corrective control that we could implement in this project? That could be something like IDS, IPS. Who can tell me what that is?
Intrusion
Detection and intrusion prevention system.
Exactly. So these it listed intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. They have little clues in their names of what these are, of whether they're preventative or detective. So intrusion detection, it detects what's going on, and it'll maybe alert you, but it's not taking any action afterwards. And like I said, an intrusion prevention system is actually configured to take some automated response action. At that point, I don't know if you would call it corrective. It's definitely preventative. It's sort of corrective if it's automatically taking a response. A corrective response, an example of this would be a compliance issue. Of if you know that there's certain data that can't be unencrypted, it always has to be encrypted when it's at rest. Well, you could set up controls where if it detects anything that's unencrypted, detective, that it would correct that by automatically encrypting for you. So you can use a combination of these controls for it. Okay. System images. Is that a technical, physical, or administrative control? System images.
Like an ISO, like a copy of the image?
Yeah, exactly. So if you had a server that was a production server that you're using a lot, and you take an image so that you could really quickly restore it if something ever happened, or just have a safe back.
Probably corrective control.
Yeah, okay. And physical, technical, or administrative?
Technical.
Okay, I'm not saying you're wrong. Tell me why it's not administrative.
Well, it's not like a policy or a procedure or a standard.
Bingo. If we were having a different conversation, and let's see which one.
But it could be if someone has like weekly administrative steps they have to do, and one of them is to do a ISO every week, and that would also be administrative.
Absolutely, you nailed it. And that's this is the CISSP. Both of you guys are absolutely correct. And they could have two questions on the CISSP back to back, asking just a rephrase of the same question basically, and it would require different answers because you're absolutely right. An actual system image is a technical control, but the policy to have system images coming into play and being responsible for them, you're exactly right. That's an administrative control. So now let's jump to this piece of it, a system image. Is that preventative? I don't think it's necessarily detective. Might be corrective. And recovery is looking pretty good. We haven't talked about recovery a lot. So let's talk about how a system image might be preventative versus corrective versus recovery. So someone pick one of those and jump in with some ideas.
I believe it's corrective, just in case the system crashed for some. Look back to an update.
Yeah.
Windows was wrong, and so now you're doing corrective. So let's switch over to, let's say the system, the motherboard just took a crashed. Now you're doing recovery.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Because then you're moving on to that recovery piece. It's even the preventative, because you have a system image to prevent the risk of not having that system available. So you're 100% right. You're preventing bad things from happening, and then when you use system images, it can be corrective if something goes wrong and you're not sure how to fix it. Well, let's just get the golden image back up there. So it can be corrective, and that's accurate. It's a piece of recovery of getting back on track. So yeah, great answers. Great answers. Okay, let's pick out another interesting here. Who can tell me what a man trap is?
So when you enter the organization, you have a turnstile where one person is only allowed to go into, and so basically you cannot have tailgating done, right? So it just blocks multiple people getting into the building, getting access to the physical part of the building. So it just blocks multiple users entering into the building, and it only allows one person at a time, kind of thing.
Yeah, perfect. And you used a great term, tailgating. This is one of those like IT words that isn't written necessarily in a manual, but tailgating is when you're following closely behind someone enough so that you could potentially bypass security measures. So an example like you're saying is if you're going through a badged door, how do you know that the guy holding the box of donuts that you're just trying to be friendly for isn't trying to weasel his way into the building on all purpose? So a man trap prevents that. Only one person at a time goes through, and there's no chance of tailgating. So great answer there. So we were discussing man traps. Is a man trap preventative or is it a deterrent?
It's definitely preventative,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it could also be a deterrent.
correct. And that's how they're going to try and trick you up because you're right. It does deter people. I am less likely to go after them if they have a man trap in place. It makes it harder for me to do my bad guy job. Preventative? Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to prevent tailgating very specifically. So again, they could ask you that question, just rephrase a handful of times, or maybe deterrent is the answer they are looking for. So and just trying to get you guys to think in that way, but you guys are doing a great job. Okay, redundant facilities. Is that physical, technical, or administrative? And as a bonus, who can tell me what a hot versus warm versus cold site are for redundant facilities?
Hot site are as soon as the site goes down, the recovery or the backup site can just turn on itself, and it can be operational within few minutes or few hours. Cold site is like it may take days or it could be months, and warm site is sometimes it's just a few days to a week.
Yeah, excellent. Perfect summation right there. I think that makes sense. Hopefully, do you have some backup for your operations? Usually a physical site. Some of these you might hear the term colo or co-location. Basically, that's just an area where a lot of companies will store their services, almost like cloud, but right next to you, sort of. So, yeah, absolutely right. So, when we're talking about redundant facilities, again, is that a physical, technical, or administrative control?
Physical, I'd imagine.
Okay. Why is it physical?
Could be administrative as well. It's just, I think of a building, right? A redundant facility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What if your main building gets flooded or there's a fire? It's absolutely a physical control so that you can be ready to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Someone play devil's advocate. Why is it a technical control?
To restore your system back to operational.
Bingo. Yep. Failover is a term you might hear here. So if a site goes down, then it'll automatically fail over to your hot site or your warm site. Exactly. So that's a technical control as well. We have technical measures implemented to reduce our risk. All right. How is this an administrative control too?
You plan for this ahead of time, so these kind of scenarios may occur in right. So that would be a part of a strategical thing that you plan for these kind of disasters to avoid such disaster happening. So that would be considered as an administrative from the strategic point of view.
100%. 100%. Why would we need a redundant facility at all? Do we have a disaster plan that requires one? Does it make sense for our operations? These are business decisions that we get into more. But you can see that for one thing, all three of these are correct. There's nothing wrong with what any of you guys have said. So you're going to get a question, and you just have to read between the lines for what they're actually asking for. Again, there's going to be a focus in that question at some level there that'll kind of clue you in on what answer they're looking for, what level of question. So great job. Let's talk about another one that's interesting on here. Policies, testing. Let's talk about cryptography. Oh, I gave you the answers. Cryptography. All right, cryptography very likely is going to be a technical aspect. We're talking about technical controls. How do we reduce our risk? Well, we make it harder for people to breach integrity or confidentiality. Could be administrative in the sense that we have to determine what encryption standards or what cipher suite we allow, but it's technical. So let's talk about cryptography in these lanes. Does cryptography help prevent, detect, correct, deter, recover? Tell me about